The wheel of the expensive custom-made wagon splintered as Sophia Lancaster tried to navigate the rutted country road. With championships in 3 countries and millions in sponsorships, she could buy 100 wagons, but here, stranded in farm country, none of that mattered. Through the trees, she spotted a weathered farmhouse with a man working in the adjacent field. Their eyes met across the distance, neither knowing this chance encounter would transform both their lives forever. A humble farmer with calloused hands and mounting debts was about to meet the woman who could save everything he loved, if only he could see past his pride. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Ethan Miller wiped the sweat from his brow, leaving a streak of dirt across his forehead. The midday sun beat down mercilessly on his back as he worked the soil of what remained of his family farm. 3 generations of Millers had worked this land, but if things didn't change soon, Ethan feared he would be the last. The bank's latest notice sat unopened on his kitchen table, but he already knew what it said. 3 months behind on payments. Foreclosure imminent. He drove his shovel into the earth with more force than necessary. The physical exertion a welcome distraction from the financial worries that plagued his every waking moment. The drought had been brutal this year, and the rising costs of everything from seed to equipment parts had squeezed what little profit margin he might have had into nothing. Ethan glanced toward the western edge of his property, where the road curved around a stand of oak trees. The sound caught his attention, the unmistakable creak of wood under stress, followed by a sharp crack and a woman's frustrated cry. Squinting against the sun, he saw a horse-drawn wagon tilted awkwardly on the side of the road, one wheel clearly broken. For a moment, he considered ignoring it. He had his own problems to deal with, and he was already behind schedule on preparing the eastern field. But his father's voice echoed in his memory. A miller never turns away from someone in need. With a sigh, Ethan planted his shovel in the ground and started toward the road. As he approached, he got a better look at the stranger. She was tall and slender, with chestnut hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her clothes were simple but clearly expensive riding boots that cost more than Ethan made in a month, and a fitted jacket that looked tailored to her athletic frame. She was examining the broken wheel with focused intensity, her hands on her hips. "Need some help?" Ethan called when he was within earshot. The woman turned, clearly startled. She hadn't heard him approach. "Oh, yes, thank you. I hit a pothole, and the wheel just gave way." Up close, Ethan could see that the wagon was no ordinary farm cart. It was beautifully crafted, with intricate woodwork and high-quality materials. The horse hitched to it was magnificent as well, a gleaming chestnut thoroughbred that stood at least 16 hands high, with intelligent eyes and a proud bearing. "That's quite a horse," Ethan remarked, as he knelt to examine the broken wheel. "This is Monarch," the woman said, patting the horse's neck affectionately. "We've been through a lot together." Ethan nodded absently, his attention on the damage. The wheel had split along a natural seam in the wood, and several spokes had snapped. "I don't think this can be fixed on the spot," he said. "But I might have something back at the barn that could work as a temporary replacement. I'm Ethan, by the way. Ethan Miller." "Sophia Lancaster," she replied, offering her hand. Her grip was firm and confident, her palm calloused in a way that surprised him. This was no soft city woman, despite her expensive clothes. "I appreciate any help you can give. I'm a bit off the beaten path, I know." "What brings you out this way?" Ethan asked as he began to unhitch the horse. "Not many folks come down this road unless they're lost." Sophia hesitated, as if weighing how much to share. "I'm looking at properties in the area. For a potential project. Developer?" Ethan asked, trying to keep attention from his voice. The last thing this community needed was more farmland being carved up into suburbs or shopping centers. "No, nothing like that," Sophia said quickly. "I work with horses. I'm looking for the right place to build something special." Before Ethan could inquire further, Monarch snorted and shifted restlessly. Sophia immediately turned her attention to the horse, murmuring softly and stroking his neck. Ethan watched with interest. She had a natural way with the animal, and Monarch responded to her touch by visibly calming. Let me take him, Ethan offered. We can stable him at my place while we figure out what to do about your wagon. It's just over that rise. Sophia nodded gratefully, and they set off toward the farmhouse, Ethan leading Monarch while Sophia walked beside them. As they crested the hill, the full vista of Miller Farm came into view. Despite its financial troubles, there was no denying the beauty of the place, rolling fields stretching toward distant woods, the weathered but dignified farmhouse, and beyond it, the large barn with its faded red paint. This is quite a property, Sophia commented, her eyes scanning the landscape with what seemed like professional assessment. Been in my family for 3 generations, Ethan said, a hint of pride breaking through his usual reserve. My grandfather built that barn by hand, and my father expanded the fields to what you see now. And now it's yours, Sophia observed. For now, Ethan replied, the words out before he could stop them. He quickly changed the subject. Let's get your horse settled, and then we can see about that wheel. As they approached the barn, a border collie came bounding around the corner, barking excitedly. That's Max, Ethan explained, as the dog circled them enthusiastically. Don't worry, he's friendly. I'm good with dogs, Sophia said, kneeling to let Max sniff her hand before giving him a scratch behind the ears. The dog immediately took to her, leaning against her leg as she stood up again. He's usually more cautious with strangers, Ethan remarked, surprised. Sophia smiled. Animals tend to trust me. It's a gift. The interior of the barn was cool and dim after the bright sunshine outside. Several empty stalls lined one wall, remnants of a time when the farm had supported more livestock. Ethan led Monarch to the largest stall and began to remove his tack. You have a good setup here, Sophia commented, running her hand along the sturdy wood of the stall door. Solid construction. Ethan nodded. My grandfather didn't believe in cutting corners, said anything worth building was worth building right. Smart man, Sophia said, helping to remove Monarch's saddle with practiced ease. Ethan noticed that she handled the heavy equipment without difficulty, another sign that she was accustomed to working with horses. Once Monarch was settled with fresh water and some hay that Ethan had stored for his own aging draft horse, they turned their attention to the wagon problem. I might have an old wheel in the workshop that could work, Ethan said, leading Sophia to an adjoining section of the barn. My father never threw anything away. The workshop was cluttered but organized, with tools hanging on pegs and various equipment parts stored on shelves. Ethan rummaged through a stack of wood in the corner and triumphantly pulled out a wheel that was slightly smaller than the one on Sophia's wagon, but appeared to be in good condition. This might do the trick, he said. It won't be perfect, but it should get you back to town. You're a lifesaver, Sophia said with genuine gratitude. I thought I was going to be stranded out here. Ethan shrugged off the praise. Still need to see if it fits. Let's head back to your wagon. They walked to the road in companionable silence, Ethan carrying the wheel and some tools. As they walked, Ethan found himself studying Sophia out of the corner of his eye. There was something about her that didn't quite fit with his initial impression of a wealthy hobbyist. She moved with athletic grace, and her observation of the farm had been more analytical than casual. And those calluses on her hands, those came from years of hard work. So, you said you work with horses? Ethan ventured as they approached the wagon. What exactly do you do? Again, that slight hesitation before she answered. I train them mostly, help them reach their potential. It wasn't a lie, Ethan sensed, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Before he could press further, they reached the wagon, and the practical task at hand took precedence. The wheel replacement was challenging work. The axle had been damaged in the break, and Ethan had to make several trips back to the barn for additional tools and parts. Throughout the process, Sophia worked alongside him, holding the wagon steady when needed and offering suggestions that revealed a surprising knowledge of mechanical issues. You know your way around repairs, Ethan commented as she handed him exactly the wrench he needed before he even asked for it. When you travel with horses and equipment, you learn to be self-sufficient, she replied. Though I'll admit, this is testing my limits. The sun was beginning to set by the time they finally secured the replacement wheel. Ethan stepped back, wiping his hands on a rag. It's not pretty, but it should hold until you can get a proper replacement in town. he said. I can't thank you enough, Sophia said, reaching for her wallet. Please, let me pay you for your time and the parts. Ethan waved her off. Keep your money. Neighbors help neighbors around here. We're not neighbors, Sophia pointed out with a small smile. Anyone within 20 miles is a neighbor in these parts, Ethan replied. Besides, that wheel was just gathering dust. Sophia looked like she wanted to insist, but something in Ethan's expression must have told her it would be futile. Instead, she glanced at the darkening sky. It's getting late, she observed. I should get back to town. You're welcome to stay for dinner, Ethan found himself saying, surprising himself as much as her. It's nothing fancy, but I make a decent beef stew. The offer hung in the air between them. Ethan was already regretting his impulsiveness. He wasn't in the habit of inviting strangers to dinner, especially not when the farm was in such a precarious state. But there was something about Sophia that made him curious to learn more. I wouldn't want to impose, she said, though Ethan thought he detected a note of interest in her voice. It's no imposition, he assured her. And we still need to bring Monarch back from the barn. You might as well have a hot meal before you head back. After a moment's consideration, Sophia nodded. All right, a meal would be nice. Thank you. As they walked back to the farmhouse, the last light of day casting long shadows across the fields, Ethan found himself wondering about the woman beside him. Who was Sophia Lancaster really, and what had brought her to this remote corner of the county? Little did he know, the answers to those questions would soon change the course of his life, forever. The farmhouse kitchen was warm and inviting, despite its outdated appliances and worn countertops. Ethan moved with practiced efficiency, setting a pot of stew to warm on the stove, while Sophia stood somewhat awkwardly in the doorway. Make yourself at home, he said, gesturing to the small kitchen table by the window. There's water in the pitcher if you're thirsty. Sophia sat, her eyes taking in the details of the room, the faded curtains that had probably been hung by Ethan's mother, the collection of well-used cookbooks on a shelf, and most tellingly, the stack of bills and bank notices hastily pushed to one side of the table. She averted her eyes from these quickly, not wanting to pry. This is a lovely home, she said sincerely. You can feel the history in it. Ethan glanced around as if seeing the place through a stranger's eyes. It's seen better days, he admitted. But it's home. As the stew heated, Ethan set 2 mismatched bowls on the table, along with some crusty bread he baked the day before. It was a simple meal, but the aroma filling the kitchen suggested it would be a tasty one. So, Ethan said as he served the stew, you mentioned you're looking at properties for a project involving horses. What kind of project, if you don't mind my asking? Sophia took a spoonful of stew before answering, her expression appreciative of the flavor. This is delicious, she said, then seemed to make a decision. I'm looking to establish a training facility for competitive riders and their horses. Like a riding school? Ethan asked, breaking off a piece of bread. Something like that, but more specialized, Sophia explained. A place where talented riders can develop their skills to the highest level, the kind of facility that produces champions. Sounds ambitious, Ethan remarked, studying her with renewed interest. Is there much demand for something like that around here? There would be, if it existed, Sophia said confidently. The right facility with the right trainer could draw people from all over the country. This area has a lot to offer: beautiful terrain, reasonable land prices, good access to transportation. The right property could be transformed into something world-class. End quote. The passion in her voice was unmistakable, and Ethan found himself drawn in despite his usual skepticism of grand plans. You sound like you know what you're talking about, he said. Sophia took another bite of stew, considering her response. I've been in the competitive riding world for a long time. I've trained at facilities all over the world, and I know what works and what doesn't. And now you want to build your own, Ethan concluded. Why here, though? This isn't exactly horse country. That's where you're wrong, Sophia countered. This land has everything a good training facility needs. Varied terrain for different types of training, enough space for proper facilities, and it's still within reasonable distance of major competition venues. Plus, she added with a small smile, property is more affordable here than in traditional equestrian centers. Ethan nodded slowly, seeing his region through new eyes. He'd always viewed the rolling hills and woods as obstacles to farming, not assets for training horses. "So, have you found a suitable property yet?" he asked, trying to sound casual despite a sudden, inexplicable tightness in his chest. Sophia hesitated. "I've seen a few possibilities, nothing perfect yet." Their conversation drifted to other topics as they finished their meal. Ethan found himself sharing stories about growing up on the farm, about his father's determination to keep the place going through droughts and economic downturns, and about his own struggles since inheriting the property 2 years ago. "It's not just the weather and the prices," he confided as they cleared the dishes. "Farming is changing. The small operations like mine can barely compete with the big corporate farms. They have technology and resources I can only dream of." Sophia listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that revealed a surprising understanding of agricultural challenges. As the evening progressed, Ethan found himself speaking more openly than he had with anyone in years. There was something about Sophia that inspired trust, despite her somewhat mysterious background. After dinner, they sat on the porch, watching as darkness fell completely over the farm. The air was cool but pleasant, filled with the sounds of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. "I should get going soon," Sophia said eventually, though she made no move to stand. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." "It's been nice having company," Ethan admitted. "Gets a bit lonely out here sometimes." Sophia turned to look at him, her expression thoughtful. "Can I ask you something personal, Ethan?" He nodded, curious. "If you're struggling so much with the farm, why not sell? Start fresh somewhere else, doing something different?" The question hit a nerve, but Ethan found he wasn't offended. It was a logical question, one he'd asked himself countless times on sleepless nights. "This land isn't just property to me," he said slowly, trying to articulate feelings he rarely put into words. "It's my heritage. My grandfather cleared some of these fields by hand. My father worked himself to the bone to keep it going during the bad years. Their sweat and blood are in this soil. Selling would feel like betraying them." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, her gaze directed out at the darkened fields. "I understand family legacy," she said finally. "But sometimes honoring the past means finding new ways to preserve what matters most. Your grandfather and father worked this land because it was the best way they knew to provide for their families and build something lasting. Maybe there are other ways to honor their legacy while building your own future." End quote. The words resonated with Ethan in a way he hadn't expected. Before he could respond, Sophia stood. "I really should get back. Thank you again for your help today. And for dinner." Ethan rose as well. "Let me hitch up Monarch to your wagon. It's too dark for you to do it alone." They walked to the barn in companionable silence, the beam of Ethan's flashlight illuminating the path. Monarch nickered softly when they entered, clearly recognizing Sophia's footsteps. As Ethan helped prepare the wagon, Sophia reached into a compartment and pulled out a business card. "If you ever need anything," she said, handing it to him. "Or, if you just want to talk more about the future of this place." Ethan took the card, though in the dim light of the barn, he couldn't make out what it said. He pocketed it with a nod of thanks. Once Monarch was hitched and the wagon was ready to go, Sophia climbed up to the driver's seat. She looked down at Ethan, her expression hard to read in the darkness. "I meant what I said about your farm having potential," she said. "Think about it." With a gentle flick of the reins, she set Monarch in motion, the wagon creaking slightly as it began to roll. Ethan stood watching until the sound of hooves and wheels faded into the night. Only when he was back in the farmhouse did he remember the business card. He pulled it from his pocket and switched on the kitchen light to read it. Sophia Lancaster, it read in elegant script. Olympic gold medalist, international equestrian champion, training and consultation. Ethan stared at the card, the pieces suddenly falling into place. The expensive clothes, the magnificent horse, the confident way she had handled Monarch, her extensive knowledge of competitive riding facilities. He'd spent the entire day with one of the most accomplished equestrians in the world, and he hadn't had a clue. With a disbelieving shake of his head, Ethan placed the card on the counter and went to bed, his mind churning with new possibilities that he wasn't quite ready to acknowledge. The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect spring day that would normally have lifted Ethan's spirits as he began his chores. Instead, he found himself distracted, his thoughts repeatedly drifting to Sophia Lancaster and the revelation of her identity. He'd looked her up online after breakfast, using the ancient desktop computer that had been his father's pride and joy a decade ago. What he found had astounded him. Sophia Lancaster wasn't just successful, she was legendary in equestrian circles. 3 Olympic gold medals, numerous world championships, and a reputation as one of the finest trainers in the sport. According to the articles, she had recently stepped back from competitive riding to focus on developing the next generation of champions. And she had been in his kitchen, eating his stew, and telling him his land had potential. Ethan was mucking out the stall that had briefly housed Monarch when the sound of an approaching vehicle caught his attention. Through the barn door, he saw a sleek black SUV pull up beside the farmhouse. A moment later, Sophia emerged from the passenger side. She was dressed differently, today still practical for country driving, but with an unmistakable polish that spoke of wealth and success. She spotted him in the barn doorway and raised a hand in greeting before walking toward him. "Good morning," she called as she approached. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by unannounced." "Not at all," Ethan replied, suddenly conscious of his work clothes and the pitchfork in his hand. "Though I wish I'd known who you were yesterday. I wouldn't have served an Olympic champion my simple stew." Sophia's lips curved in a smile. "You looked me up." "I did," Ethan admitted. "Why didn't you tell me?" She shrugged, leaning against the barn door frame. "People treat me differently when they know. I wanted your honest opinion of the area, not one colored by who I am." "Fair enough," Ethan conceded. "So, what brings you back today?" Sophia's expression turned serious. "I wanted to discuss something with you, a proposition of sorts." Ethan's heartbeat quickened, though he wasn't sure why. "What kind of proposition?" "Let's walk," Sophia suggested. "I'd like to see more of your property, if that's all right." Curious, Ethan set aside the pitchfork and led Sophia out of the barn. They walked in silence for a few minutes, following a path that wound around the edge of the nearest field toward a small rise that offered a view of much of the farm. When they reached the top, Sophia stopped, her gaze sweeping across the landscape, the rolling fields, the small creek that cut through the western section, the woodlands that marked the property's boundaries. "Ethan," she said finally, turning to face him, "I've been looking at properties throughout this region for the past month. None of them have what I'm looking for. None of them. Except this one." Ethan stared at her, a complex mix of emotions churning inside him. "My farm? You want to buy my farm?" "Not exactly," Sophia replied. "I'm proposing a partnership. A way for you to keep your family legacy while transforming it into something sustainable for the future." "I don't understand," Ethan said, though a glimmer of what she might be suggesting was beginning to dawn on him. "I want to build my training academy here, on your land," Sophia explained. "Not by buying you out, but by investing in a joint venture. You would remain the landowner, but a portion of the property would be developed into a world-class equestrian facility. We would share the profits." Ethan's mind raced, trying to process the implications. "But farming is what I know. It's what my family has always done." "And you could continue to farm part of the land," Sophia assured him. "But the reality is, Ethan, this property is too large for one person to manage effectively as a traditional farm, especially with today's agricultural economics. My facility would take perhaps a third of your acreage, the hillier sections that aren't ideal for crops anyway. The rest would remain as farmland, though I'd suggest focusing on hay and feed production that could supply our own horses, as well as other stables in the region." End quote. The proposal was breathtaking in its scope, and Ethan struggled to wrap his mind around it. "This sounds substantial. The investment would be enormous." "I have the capital," Sophia said simply. "What I don't have is the right location and a partner who understands the land. You have both." Ethan shook his head, overwhelmed. "Why me, though?" Why not buy some corporate farm that's already for sale? There are plenty of those around. Sophia's expression softened. Because when I saw you yesterday, I recognized something I value highly: integrity. You helped a stranger without hesitation, refused payment for your time and materials, and spoke about your family and this land with genuine love and respect. Those qualities are rare, Ethan. They're what I want associated with my academy. And the sincerity in her voice was undeniable, and Ethan found himself both flattered and humbled by her assessment. I need to think about this, he said finally. It's a lot to take in. Of course, Sophia agreed immediately. Take all the time you need. But I'd like to show you something first, if you're willing. It might help you visualize what I'm proposing. Curious despite his reservations, Ethan nodded. Sophia led him back down the hill toward the SUV. As they approached, the driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall and distinguished-looking, with silver at his temples and sharp, observant eyes. Ethan, this is Marcus Huntington, my business manager and advisor. Sophia introduced them. Marcus, this is Ethan Miller, the owner of the property I told you about. The men shook hands, Ethan conscious of his dirt-stained palms against Marcus's immaculate ones. Mr. Miller, Marcus said, with a polite nod. Sophia speaks highly of you. Call me Ethan, he replied automatically, then turned to Sophia. What did you want to show me? In response, she opened the rear door of the SUV and pulled out a large portfolio case. They moved to the porch of the farmhouse, where Sophia laid the case on the small table and opened it to reveal a set of architectural renderings. These are conceptual designs for the academy, she explained, spreading out the drawings. They're not site-specific yet, but they'll give you an idea of what I envision. Ethan leaned forward, studying the detailed illustrations. The facility was indeed impressive, a complex of elegant yet practical buildings designed to blend with the rural landscape. There was a main training center with indoor and outdoor arenas, stables that could house dozens of horses, accommodations for students and trainers, and various auxiliary buildings for equipment, veterinary care, and corral. Administration. This is substantial, Ethan said, echoing his earlier assessment. It would be built in phases, Marcus explained, speaking for the first time since the introductions, starting with the essential training facilities and expanding as the academy establishes itself. The goal, Sophia added, is to create not just a training center but a destination, a place where the top equestrians in the country, or even the world, would come to train and learn. It would bring jobs and economic activity to the entire B region. Ethan's gaze moved from one rendering to the next, his farmer's eye noting how the buildings were positioned to take advantage of natural features while minimizing disruption to the land. Despite his reservations, he couldn't help but be impressed by the thought and care evident in the designs. And you think this could work here? On my farm? He asked. I don't just think it, I know it, Sophia said with quiet confidence. This land has everything we need, the space, the varied terrain, the beauty. With your knowledge of the property and my expertise in equestrian training, we could create something extraordinary. Ethan looked up from the drawings to find both Sophia and Marcus watching him intently. He felt the weight of the moment, the sense that he stood at a crossroads that would determine not just his own future, but the future of the land his family had stewarded for generations. Like I said, I need time to think, he said finally. This isn't a decision I can make on the spot. Of course, Sophia replied, gathering the renderings and returning them to the portfolio. Here's my proposal in writing, including financial projections and a suggested division of responsibilities and profits. She handed him a thick envelope. Take as long as you need to review it. And if you have questions, I'm staying at the Riverside Inn in town for the next week. Ethan accepted the envelope, feeling its weight both literally and metaphorically. Thank you. I'll give it serious consideration. After Sophia and Marcus departed, Ethan sat on the porch for a long time, the envelope unopened in his lap. Part of him was excited by the possibilities Sophia had presented a way to save the farm, to honor his family's legacy while creating something new and potentially transformative. Another part was terrified of change, of the unknown, of potentially making a decision his father and grandfather might have disapproved of. Finally, with a deep breath, he opened the envelope and began to read. The following days passed in a blur of research and soul-searching for Ethan. He pored over the proposal Sophia had left, consulted with his bank and his lawyer, and spent hours walking the property, trying to envision how it might change under the plan. The financial projections were both daunting and exhilarating. The initial investment would be substantial, but entirely funded by Double-A. Sophia. Once operational, the academy promised to generate far more income than the farm ever could on its own. If the projections were accurate, Ethan would not only be able to pay off his debts within 3 years, but would eventually see profits that would have seemed impossible from farming alone. But this wasn't just about money. It was about identity, about the very meaning of the farm and Ethan's place within it. Would he still be a farmer if half his income came from an equestrian academy? Would the land still be Miller Farm if it housed arenas and stables alongside the crop fields? On the 4th day after Sophia's visit, Ethan drove into town, a list of questions in his pocket and a tentative decision in his heart. He found Sophia in the small dining room of the Riverside Inn, where she was having lunch with Marcus and another woman Ethan didn't recognize. When Sophia spotted him in the doorway, her face lit up with a smile that made his pulse quicken unexpectedly. She waved him over to their table. "Ethan, what a pleasant surprise," she said as he approached. "Please, join us. This is Rebecca Chen, my architect." The woman rose to shake Ethan's hand. She was petite but carried herself with confidence, her sharp eyes assessing him with professional interest. "Mr. Miller," she said, "I've been hoping to meet you. Sophia has told me a great deal about your property." "Please sit," Marcus added, gesturing to the empty chair beside Sophia. "We were just discussing potential adaptations to the design based on topographical maps of the region." Ethan sat, feeling somewhat out of place in his work clothes amid their business attire, but neither Sophia nor her colleagues seemed to notice or care about the disparity. "I've been reviewing your proposal," Ethan said, addressing Sophia directly. "I have some questions." "Of course," she replied, signaling to the waiter to bring another place setting. "We can discuss anything you like. But first, have some lunch. The special today is excellent." The next hour was surreal for Ethan. Over beef stew that couldn't compare to his own, he found himself engaged in detailed discussions about drainage patterns, soil composition, and how these factors would influence building locations. Rebecca took notes and made quick sketches as Ethan described various features of the property that didn't show up on maps. The spring that never ran dry, even in drought years. The section of the eastern field that tended to flood in heavy rains. The old logging trail through the woods that could potentially serve as a riding path. Throughout the conversation, Ethan was struck by how seriously they took his input. These were accomplished professionals in their respective fields, yet they listened to his observations with genuine interest and respect. It was a stark contrast to his interactions with bank managers and agricultural supply representatives, who often treated him as if his years of experience with the land counted for nothing against their spreadsheets and projections. As the meal concluded, Sophia turned to Marcus and Rebecca. "Would you mind giving Ethan and me a few minutes alone? I think we have some partnership details to discuss." The others departed tactfully, leaving Ethan and Sophia at the table with fresh coffee cups between them. "So," Sophia said, her expression turning serious, "you've had time to consider. What are your thoughts?" Ethan took a deep breath. "I'm interested," he admitted. "The plan makes sense financially, and I can see how it could work on the land. But I have concerns." "I'd be worried if you didn't," Sophia replied. "This is a major decision." "What concerns you most?" "Control," Ethan said bluntly. "This has been Miller land for generations. The proposal gives you significant authority over development decisions. I need to know that the character of the place won't be entirely transformed, that some essence of what makes it Miller Farm will remain." Sophia nodded thoughtfully. "That's entirely fair. I'm open to adjusting the governance structure to give you more say in development decisions. My expertise is in equestrian training and facility requirements, not in land management." I'd value your guidance on how to integrate the academy with the existing landscape in a way that preserves its character. Her willingness to compromise reassured Ethan, but he had more concerns to address. There's also the matter of my role going forward. I'm a farmer, Sophia. I don't know anything about running an equestrian academy. And I don't expect you to, Sophia replied quickly. My team and I would handle the academy operations. Your role would be focused on the agricultural aspects, continuing to farm the remaining acreage, potentially transitioning some of it to hay and feed production for our horses, and advising on land use issues. Over time, if you're interested, there could be opportunities for you to become more involved in the equestrian side, but that would be entirely up to you. Ethan considered this, turning his coffee cup slowly between his palms. And if the academy fails? What happens to my land then? It was a blunt question, but Sophia didn't seem offended. Instead, she leaned forward, her expression serious. That's a legitimate concern, she acknowledged. I propose we include a reversion clause in our agreement. If the academy fails to become financially viable within 5 years, all constructed facilities would either be repurposed for agricultural use or removed at my expense, with the land returned to its original buy condition as much as possible. Your ownership of the property would never be in jeopardy. The answer was reassuring, suggesting Sophia had already considered this possibility. Ethan nodded slowly, appreciating her forthright approach. One more question, he said. Why me? There must be dozens of struggling farmers in this county alone who would jump at an opportunity like this. Why choose my farm specifically? Sophia's eyes met his with an intensity that made him momentarily forget his question. 3 reasons, she replied. First, your land has the ideal topography and location-varied terrain, perfect for different types of training, good access to transportation, and natural beauty that will attract top clients. Second, the moment I saw how you cared for Monarch, I knew you understood horses not just as tools or assets, but as partners. That's rare and valuable. She paused, a slight smile touching her lips before continuing. And third, when I offered to pay you for fixing my wagon, you refused. You said neighbors help neighbors around here. That told me everything I needed to know about your character. This academy won't succeed just because of good business plans and financial backing. It will succeed because of the values behind it: integrity, hard work, respect for the land and animals. You embody those values, Ethan. That's why it has to be your farm. Ethan felt heat rising to his face, unaccustomed to such direct praise. He looked down at his coffee cup, then back at Sophia. If we do this, he said slowly, I need your word that we'll build something my grandfather would be proud of. Something that respects the history of this land. You have my word. Sophia replied without hesitation, extending her hand across the table. After a moment's pause, Ethan reached out and shook it, feeling as though he had just crossed a threshold from which there was no returning. Partners then, he said. Partners, Sophia agreed, a genuine smile spreading across her face. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Once the initial agreement was signed, Sophia's team descended on the farm with an efficiency that left Ethan both impressed and slightly overwhelmed. Surveyors mapped every acre, soil samples were taken from various locations, and Rebecca, the architect, spent days walking the property with Ethan, noting his observations about drainage patterns and seasonal changes. Throughout it all, Ethan was struck by how carefully Sophia integrated his input into the planning process. When he expressed concern about the proposed location for the main arena, which would have required removing a stand of oak trees planted by his grandfather, the entire design was adjusted to preserve them. When he suggested that the old stone spring house could be restored rather than replaced with a modern structure, Sophia immediately agreed, commissioning a historical restoration specialist to assess the building. One evening, about a month after their partnership began, Ethan found Sophia sitting alone on the porch of the farmhouse, a tablet computer in her lap, but her gaze fixed on the sunset painting the fields in golden light. Mind if I join you? He asked. Please do, she replied, setting aside her work. I was just taking a moment to appreciate the view. I can see why your family chose this spot for the house. Ethan settled into the chair beside her, passing her a glass of homemade lemonade. My great-grandfather used to say the sunset view was worth more than all the crops combined. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land. In the distance, the framework of the first new building, a stable, designed to house the initial complement of training horses, was visible, a skeletal outline against the darkening sky. "It's really happening," Ethan said, more to himself than to Sophia. "Having second thoughts?" she asked, her tone gentle but direct. Ethan considered the question honestly. "Not second thoughts exactly. More like moments of disbelief. 6 weeks ago, I was facing foreclosure. Now I'm watching the first building of what will be a world-class equestrian academy rising on my land. It's a lot to process." Sophia nodded, understanding. Change, even positive change, can be disorienting. "For what it's worth, I think you're handling it remarkably well." "Thanks to your patience," Ethan acknowledged. "I appreciate how you've included me in every decision. It makes it feel like I'm still the steward of this land, even as it transforms." "That's exactly what you are," Sophia said earnestly. "This isn't about replacing Miller Farm with something else. It's about evolution, helping the land fulfill a new purpose while honoring its history." Her words resonated with Ethan, articulating the complex emotions he'd been struggling to define. Before he could respond, the sound of tires on gravel announced the arrival of a vehicle. Headlights swept across the yard as a truck pulled up beside the house. "Expecting someone?" Sophia asked, sitting up straighter. "No," Ethan replied, rising to his feet. As the driver's door opened, he recognized the silhouette immediately. "It's my brother, David." David Miller was slightly taller than Ethan, with the same brown hair but a leaner build, his frame suggesting an indoor profession rather than farm work. He approached the porch with a wary expression, his gaze shifting between Ethan and Sophia. "Evening," he said, stopping at the foot of the porch steps. "Thought I'd find you alone, Ethan. Didn't mean to interrupt." "You're not interrupting," Ethan assured him, though tension was evident in his voice. "David, this is Sophia Lancaster, my business partner." "Sophia, my brother David." "Business partner?" David repeated, making no move to shake Sophia's outstretched hand. "That's what you're calling it now? Last I heard, you were turning the family farm into some kind of horse playground for the rich." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Where did you hear that?" "It's a small town, Ethan. Word gets around. Construction crews talking at the diner, surveyors stopping for gas. You think people aren't going to notice when Miller Farm suddenly starts, sprouting fancy new buildings?" "I was going to tell you once we had the initial phase underway," Ethan said, defensive. Things had been moving quickly. 5 weeks without a phone call is moving quickly? David's voice held the edge of old grievances. "I had to hear about it from Mrs. Henderson at the grocery store. Do you have any idea how that felt? To have her ask me about that fancy horse lady who's taking over our family farm?" Ethan descended the steps to stand face to face with his brother. "No one is taking over anything. I'm still the owner. This is a partnership that's going to save the farm, not destroy it." "Save it by turning it into something it was never meant to be," David countered. "Do you think Dad would have approved of this?" The question struck Ethan like a physical blow. He'd asked himself the same thing countless times in the past weeks. "Dad would have wanted the farm to survive," he said finally. "He would have understood that sometimes survival requires adaptation." "Adaptation," David scoffed. "Is that what you call selling out?" Before Ethan could respond, Sophia stepped down from the porch to join them. "Mr. Miller, David, I understand your concerns. Family land carries deep meaning. But I assure you, our partnership respects the history and integrity of this place. We're not erasing Miller Farm, we're building on its foundation." David turned to her, his expression skeptical. "And who exactly are you? What gives you the right to decide the future of land that's been in our family for generations?" "I don't have that right," Sophia replied calmly. "That's why I've partnered with Ethan, who does. Every decision we've made has been collaborative, with deep consideration for this farm's legacy." "She's telling the truth, David," Ethan added. "Come inside. Let me show you the plans. You'll see that we're preserving most of the original farm, just adding new elements that will make it financially viable again." David hesitated, his anger visibly warring with curiosity. Finally, He gave a curt nod. Fine. Show me these grand plans of yours. The three of them moved into the farmhouse kitchen, where Ethan spread out the latest architectural drawings on the table. As Sophia excused herself to make a phone call, giving the brothers some privacy, Ethan explained each aspect of the development, where the training facilities would be located, how the remaining farmland would be used, the timeline for construction, and the projected financial outcomes. Gradually, David's rigid posture relaxed as he studied the plans. You're keeping the old apple orchard, he observed, pointing to an area marked as Heritage Orchard Trail. Of course, Ethan said. Those trees are part of our history. The trail will wind through them, connecting the main facilities to the cross-country training area. David's finger moved to another section of the map. And Dad's experimental plot? Where he tried all those heritage grain varieties? That's going to become a demonstration garden, Ethan explained. Sophia suggested Ite Place to showcase the agricultural history of the region alongside the equestrian facilities. David was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. You really have thought this through, he admitted finally. It's not what I expected. What did you expect? Ethan asked. I don't know. Bulldozers leveling the fields? The farmhouse torn down for some modernist monstrosity? I couldn't bear the thought of coming back here and not recognizing the place where we grew up. Ethan placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. That will never happen, David. No matter what changes come, this will always be Miller Farm at its heart. When Sophia returned to the kitchen, she found the brothers engaged in animated discussion about the potential for hosting community events on the property once the academy was established. Local schools could come for field trips, David was suggesting. Learn about both traditional farming and modern equestrian sport. Exactly the kind of outreach I was hoping for, Sophia said, rejoining them at the table. The academy shouldn't be isolated from the community. It should be a resource for it. David gave her a considering look. You're not what I expected either, Ms. Lancaster. Please, call me Sophia, she replied. And what did you expect? Someone more corporate, less willing to listen to concerns about tradition and community. Sophia smiled. My success in equestrian sport has always been rooted in partnership with horses, with trainers, with the land we train on. This project is no different. Without Ethan's knowledge and vision for this place, it wouldn't be what it needs to be. The conversation continued late into the evening, with David gradually shifting from skepticism to cautious enthusiasm. By the time he left, with a promise to return the following weekend to see the construction progress, the tension between the brothers had largely dissipated. As Ethan watched his brother's truck disappear down the driveway, Sophia joined him by the window. Thank you, Ethan said simply. For what? For giving me the space to talk with him. For understanding that this isn't just about business for us. Sophia's expression was gentle in the dim light. Family is complicated. I know that better than most. But what you're doing here, it matters, Ethan. Not just for the academy, but for preserving a legacy in a way that can thrive in today's world. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Ethan felt something shift between them, a deepening of connection that transcended their business partnership. Before either could acknowledge it, Sophia's phone buzzed with a message. That's Marcus, she said, checking the screen. The first delivery of specialty lumber for the stable interior is scheduled for tomorrow morning. I should go review the specifications before it arrives. Of course, Ethan nodded, the moment passing. I'll see you tomorrow. As Sophia gathered her things and departed, Ethan remained by the window, watching her car's taillights recede into the distance. He found himself wondering what his father would really think of all this, not just the changes to the farm, but the woman who had initiated them. Somehow, he thought his dad would have approved of Sophia's straightforward approach and evident respect for the land. And perhaps, just perhaps, he would have recognized something special developing between his son and this remarkable woman, something neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge yet. Summer unfolded in a blur of activity and transformation. The first stable was completed by mid-July, its design a harmonious blend of traditional architecture and modern functionality. Ethan had worked closely with the builders, insisting on using local materials wherever possible, and personally selecting the reclaimed barnwood that lined the interior walls, giving the new structure a sense of history and continuity with the farm's past. The first horses arrived on a perfect August morning: 6 thoroughbreds and 3 warm-blood crosses, each selected by Sophia for their training potential. Ethan found himself unexpectedly moved as he watched them exploring their new paddocks, their powerful bodies gleaming in the sunlight against the backdrop of Miller Farm's rolling hills. "They look like they belong here," he said to Sophia, who stood beside him at the paddock fence. "They do," she agreed. "Horses have an intuitive sense for places where they can thrive. They've already settled more quickly than I expected." Indeed, the animals seemed remarkably at ease in their new surroundings, several of them already grazing contentedly, while others explored the perimeter of their spacious enclosures. "The main arena foundation is scheduled to be poured next week," Sophia continued, consulting her ever-present tablet. "And the first 2 trainers I've hired will arrive at the end of the month to help start the initial training programs." Ethan nodded, still watching the horses. "It's all happening so fast." "Too fast?" Sophia asked, a note of concern in her voice. "No," Ethan replied, after a moment's consideration. "It's exciting, actually, seeing the plans become reality, especially since you've been so committed to preserving the essence of the place." It was true. Throughout the construction process, Sophia had demonstrated remarkable sensitivity to the farm's history and character. When an ancient oak tree on the proposed arena site was found to be diseased and required removal, she'd arranged for a local craftsman to mill the wood and create furniture for the Academy's reception area, ensuring the tree's legacy would continue within the new buildings. Such gestures had not gone unnoticed in the community. Initially, skeptical locals had gradually warmed to the project as they observed the careful integration of new facilities with the existing landscape and appreciated the construction jobs and increased business the development brought to the area. Ethan himself had found a new purpose in the transformation. While continuing to oversee the farming operations on the remaining agricultural land, he had become increasingly involved in the equestrian aspects of the project, discovering a natural affinity for working with horses that surprised even Sophia. "You have a gift," she had told him one afternoon, after watching him gentle a nervous young mare who had resisted the approaches of more experienced handlers. "The horses trust you instinctively." Ethan had brushed off the compliment, attributing his success to growing up around farm animals, but privately he had been pleased. There was something deeply satisfying about connecting with these magnificent animals, about earning their trust and cooperation through patience and respect, the same values that had guided his approach to farming all these years. Now, as September approached, the Academy was preparing for its first limited training sessions, a soft opening before the grand launch planned for the following spring. The initial group of students would be small, just 5 talented young riders, whom Sophia had personally selected from among her network of equestrian contacts. "Are you nervous?" Ethan asked her as they walked back from the paddocks toward the farmhouse, where the office had been temporarily established until the administrative building was completed. Sophia considered the question, her pace slowing. "Not nervous exactly, but aware of the stakes. This academy represents everything I've learned throughout my career, my philosophy of training, my vision for developing the next generation of riders. It's a culmination, of sorts." "It's going to be extraordinary," Ethan said with conviction. "Anyone who spends 5 minutes with you can see that you understand horses and riders in a way few people do." Sophia's smile was worn with appreciation. "Thank you for that. But the Academy's success isn't just about my expertise. It's about the place itself, the environment we're creating together. That's why Miller Farm was so perfect. It already had the right energy, for lack of a better word. You cultivated that over years of careful stewardship." Her words touched Ethan deeply, affirming his own sense that what they were building together was more than just a business venture. It was a genuine partnership that honored the past while embracing a new future. As they reached the farmhouse, Sophia paused, her expression turning serious. "There's something I need to tell you, Ethan. I've been contacted by a major equestrian magazine. They want to do a feature article on the Academy. its concept, the development process, our vision for the future. That's wonderful, Ethan responded, puzzled by her somber tone. Isn't it? It is, Sophia agreed. It's exactly the kind of exposure we need. But they want to focus heavily on the unlikely partnership angle. The Olympic champion and the struggling farmer joining forces to create something innovative. Understanding dawned on Ethan. And you're worried about how I'll feel about that framing. Sophia nodded. I know how private you are, how much you value your dignity. I don't want you to feel like we're exploiting your financial struggles for a compelling narrative. Ethan was quiet for a moment, touched by her consideration. I appreciate your concern, he said finally. But I'm not ashamed of where I was when we met. Farmers across the country are facing the same challenges I did. If our story can show that there are creative solutions, ways to honor agricultural heritage while embracing new opportunities, maybe that's worth sharing. Relief eased the tension in Sophia's shoulders. So you're comfortable with the interview? They want to come next week to see the progress and talk with both of us. I'm comfortable with it, Ethan confirmed. Though I can't promise I'll be as articulate as you about our vision. Sophia's laugh was warm and genuine. You underestimate yourself, Ethan Miller. Every time you talk about this land, about what we're building here, you speak with a conviction that no media training could ever replicate. Just be yourself. That's more than enough. The interview day arrived with perfect early fall weather, clear skies, mild temperatures, and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of ripening apples from the old orchard. The magazine had sent not only a writer, but also a photographer, who spent the morning capturing images of the construction progress, the quote, horses in their new paddocks, and the stunning landscape that would serve as the backdrop for the Academy's training programs. Ethan had been nervous initially, uncomfortable with the attention and the thought of his words being recorded and published. But the interviewer, a gracious woman named Elena, who clearly knew her subject matter, put him at ease with thoughtful questions about the farm's history and his vision for its future. By the time they reached the final portion of the interview, a joint conversation with Ethan and Sophia about their partnership, Ethan found himself speaking with unexpected eloquence about the synergy between traditional farming values and the equestrian world. Both require a deep respect for the land and the animals that depend on it. He explained as they walked along the newly constructed bridle path that wound through the property. Both demand patience, consistency, and the ability to plan for the long term while adapting to immediate circumstances. In many ways, Sophia and I discovered we speak the same language, just with different vocabularies. Sophia nodded agreement. That shared understanding was crucial. From our first conversation, I could tell that Ethan grasped what this academy could be, not an imposition on the land, but an evolution of its purpose. His insight has shaped every aspect of the design and development. She gives me too much credit, Ethan demurred. I'm still learning about the equestrian world. But I do know this land, and I'm grateful that Sophia has been so committed to respecting its character while helping it fulfill a new potential. The writer looked between them, her expression thoughtful. You both speak of the farm almost as if it's a living entity with its own destiny. That's unusual in a business partnership. Perhaps, Sophia acknowledged. But I think it's precisely that perspective that will make Lancaster Miller Academy unique. We're not just building facilities. We're creating a place with heart and history, a place where both horses and humans can connect with the land and with each other. As the interview concluded and the magazine team prepared to depart, Elena took Ethan aside for one final question. Off the record, she said quietly, I'm curious. When Sophia Lancaster first approached you with this idea, did you have any doubts? Any fear that your family's legacy might be compromised? Ethan considered the question honestly. Of course I did, he admitted. Change is always frightening, especially when it involves something as personal as family land. But what I've come to understand is that legacy isn't just about preserving things exactly as they were. It's about carrying forward the values and the spirit of what came before, even as the form evolves. Elena nodded, clearly impressed by his response. Thank you for that. I think your story is going to resonate with a lot of people, not just in the equestrian world, but with anyone facing the challenge of honoring tradition while embracing necessary change. After the magazine team departed, Ethan found Sophia in the stable, checking on a young gelding that had arrived the previous day. The horse was still somewhat skittish in his new surroundings, but calmed visibly as Sophia spoke softly to him, her hand steady on his neck. "That went well, I think," Ethan said, leaning against the stall door. Sophia turned, a smile lighting her face. "Better than well. You were incredible, Ethan. The way you spoke about the land, about our vision for the Academiette was perfect." "I just spoke the truth," Ethan replied, though he was pleased by her praise. "Exactly," Sophia said, stepping out of the stall and securing the door behind her. "That's what made it powerful. When the article comes out, I suspect we'll have more interest than we can accommodate in our first year." They walked together toward the stable entrance, pausing at the doorway to admire the view of the farm spread out before them. The original fields now golden with autumn crops, the new paddocks where horses grazed peacefully, and in the distance, the framework of the main arena rising against the backdrop of rolling hills. "It's really happening," Sophia said softly, echoing Ethan's words from weeks earlier. "Sometimes I can hardly believe it." "Believe it," Ethan replied, his voice equally quiet. "Lancaster Miller Academy is becoming a reality. And it's even more extraordinary than I imagined." Their eyes met, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of how far they had come, not just in terms of the project, but in their connection to each other. Ethan found himself wondering, not for the first time, if their partnership might eventually extend beyond the boundaries of business. Before either could speak, a truck horn sounded from the main road, the delivery of specialized arena footing material they had been expecting. The moment passed as they turned toward the practical demands of the day, but the question lingered in Ethan's mind. A possibility as full of promise as the academy itself. The magazine article was published in late October, featuring a striking cover photo of Ethan and Sophia standing together on a hill overlooking the farm, the autumn landscape blazing with color around them. The headline read, "Cultivating Excellence: How an Olympic Champion and a Third-Generation Farmer Are Revolutionizing Equestrian Training." The piece was everything they had hoped for: thoughtful, detailed, and capturing the unique philosophy behind the academy. Within days of publication, Sophia's phone was ringing constantly with inquiries from potential students, investors interested in similar projects in other regions, and media outlets seeking follow-up stories. "We need to hire a public relations manager," she told Ethan one evening, as they sat at the farmhouse kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of business correspondence. "I can't keep up with all these requests and oversee the construction and training programs." Ethan nodded agreement. "What about that woman Marcus mentioned? The one who handled media for the Olympic equestrian team?" "Valerie Nguyen," Sophia supplied. "Yes, she'd be perfect if we can get her. I'll ask Marcus to reach out." Their working dinners had become a nightly ritual over the past months at a time, to review the day's progress, discuss upcoming decisions, and plan for the next phases of development. What had begun as purely business meetings had gradually evolved into more personal conversations, with Ethan sharing stories of his childhood on the farm, and Sophia recounting her experiences competing around the world. Tonight, as they cleared away the dinner dishes, Sophia hesitated, her expression thoughtful. "The article mentioned the financial troubles you were facing before our partnership. Has there been any negative reaction in the community? I worry about how that exposure might affect you personally." Ethan was touched by her concern. "Actually, it's been the opposite. Several local farmers have approached me, asking about how the partnership works, wondering if similar arrangements might be possible for their own struggling operations. I think the article made people feel less alone in their challenges." "That's wonderful," Sophia said, genuine pleasure in her voice. "That was always part of my hope for this project, but it might serve as a model for creative approaches to preserving agricultural land." "Speaking of the community," Ethan said, "the town's harvest festival is this weekend. I usually have a booth selling apples from the orchard. I was thinking, this year we might use it as an opportunity to introduce the academy to the locals in a more personal way, answer questions, Maybe offer some demonstrations." "I love that idea," Sophia replied enthusiastically. "We could bring a couple of the calmer horses, let children meet them." It's never too early to start generating interest in equestrian sport. The Harvest Festival was a long-standing tradition in the small town near Miller Farm, a weekend celebration marking the end of the growing season with food, music, crafts, and various agricultural displays. Ethan had participated every year since taking over the farm, but this year felt different as he and Sophia set up their booth early Saturday morning. In addition to the usual baskets of apples from the orchard, they had created a display featuring photographs of the Academy's progress, architectural renderings of the completed facilities, and information about the training programs that would be offered. In a nearby paddock, two of their gentlest horses waited patiently, already drawing curious onlookers. "You sure about this?" Ethan asked Sophia one last time as they arranged the booth. "These community events can be pretty informal compared to what you're used to." Sophia smiled, adjusting a photograph of the newly completed stable. "I grew up in a small town not unlike this one, Ethan. Before the Olympic medals and international competitions, I was just a girl who loved horses and helped at the local riding school. This feels like coming full circle in the best possible way." The day passed in a blur of conversations, introductions, and explanations of the Academy's vision. Some locals were initially skeptical, particularly older farmers who, like David initially, worried about the changing character of the area. But many others were enthusiastic, especially when they understood how the project had saved Miller Farm from foreclosure and would bring new jobs and economic activity to the region. What surprised Ethan most was watching Sophia interact with the townsfolk. Despite her fame and accomplishments, she was completely unpretentious, listening attentively to local stories, answering questions with patience, and showing genuine interest in the community's concerns and hopes. By midday, she was on a first-name basis with half the town, from the mayor to the teenage volunteers helping with the event. "You're a natural at this," Ethan commented as they took a brief break for lunch, sharing a picnic table with David, who had driven in from the city for the festival. "At what?" Sophia asked, taking a bite of a locally made apple turnover. "Community relations," David answered, before Ethan could. "You've won over Mrs. Henderson, and she hasn't approved of a new idea since 1982. Sophia laughed. "She reminded me of my grandmother, straight-talking and skeptical of change, but ultimately practical. Once she understood how the Academy might benefit her grandchildren by creating local jobs, she came crass. Around. That's the part many developers miss," Ethan observed. "They focus on the economics but forget the human connections, the way changes affect people's sense of place and belonging." "Exactly," Sophia agreed. "That's why your involvement is so crucial, Ethan. You understand this community in a way I never could, no matter how many harvest festivals I attend." Their eyes met across the table, that now familiar current of connection passing between them. David glanced from one to the other, a knowing smile playing at the corners of his mouth before he tactfully changed the subject to the afternoon's horse demonstrations. The day concluded with Sophia leading a brief riding demonstration in the festival's main arena, showcasing the training techniques that would be central to the Academy's approach. The crowd watched in appreciative silence as she guided her mount through a series of complex movements with almost invisible cues, horse and rider moving as one, in a display of partnership that embodied everything the Gray Academy stood for. As they packed up their booth at day's end, tired but satisfied with the community's response, Ethan found himself reflecting on how far they had come in the months since Sophia's wagon had broken down on the road near his dry field. What had begun as a chance encounter and evolved into a partnership that was transforming not just his land and livelihood, but his understanding of what was possible for Miller Farm, and perhaps for himself. The weeks following the Harvest Festival saw rapid progress on the Academy's development. The main arena was completed ahead of schedule, its soaring timber roof creating a space that was both functional for training and architecturally stunning. The administrative building, designed to echo the farmhouse's traditional style while incorporating modern amenities, was nearly finished as well. Most significant for Ethan, the remodeling of the old barn, His grandfather's pride and joy had been completed with meticulous attention to preserving its character while updating its functionality. The massive timber beams remained exposed, now carefully restored and reinforced, while new windows brought natural light into what would serve as the Academy's educational center, with classrooms, a library of equestrian resources, and a comfortable gathering space for students and trainers. "What do you think?" Sophia asked as they stood in the center of the renovated barn, one crisp November afternoon. "Does it honor the original spirit of the place?" Ethan looked around, taking in the harmonious blend of old and new. "It does," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "My grandfather would be amazed and pleased, I think. It preserves everything that made this barn special while giving it new purpose. That's been our goal throughout," Sophia replied softly, honoring the past while building for the future. As winter approached, preparations for the Academy's spring launch intensified. The initial student applications were reviewed and final selections made, staff were hired, and marketing materials were finalized. Through it all, Ethan found himself increasingly involved in the equestrian aspects of the operation, discovering a natural talent for assessing horses and working with young riders. "You should consider getting certified as an instructor," Sophia suggested one evening, as they reviewed the training schedule. "You have a gift for teaching, and your practical knowledge of the land and animals is invaluable." Ethan looked up from the papers spread across the table, surprised by the suggestion. "Me? I've never competed, never even had formal training. Neither had some of the best trainers I've worked with," Sophia countered. "Natural ability and genuine understanding can't be taught. All the technical knowledge in the world can't replace those qualities. You connect with horses and riders instinctively. The rest you can learn." The idea took root in Ethan's mind, another unexpected possibility in this new chapter of his life. He found himself watching Sophia's training sessions with greater attention, noting her methods and approaches, seeing how she balanced technical instruction with intuitive understanding of each horse and rider pair. And as the professional partnership between them deepened, so too did their personal connection. They rarely spoke of it directly, both focused on the demanding task of launching the Academy. But the current of attraction and growing affection was undeniable, evident in shared glances, in the way they instinctively sought each other's opinions, in the ease and comfort of their daily interactions. David noticed it when he visited for Thanksgiving, commenting wryly when Sophia stepped outside to take a call. "So, when are you going to tell her?" "Tell her what?" Ethan asked, though he knew perfectly well what his brother meant. David rolled his eyes. "That you're falling in love with her, obviously. It's written all over your face whenever you look at her." Ethan busied himself with checking the turkey in the oven, avoiding his brother's gaze. "It's complicated. We're business partners. There's too much at stake." "Seems to me there's too much at stake not to be honest about your feelings," David replied. "But what do I know? I'm just the brother who's watching you happier than you've been in years." The conversation lingered in Ethan's mind through the holiday weekend and into the following weeks as winter settled over the farm. Snow blanketed the fields and construction sites, temporarily slowing progress on the remaining facilities, but creating a pristine landscape that showcased the beauty of the property. One evening in mid-December, Ethan and Sophia found themselves alone in the farmhouse, reviewing final plans for the grand opening gala scheduled for March. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow throughout the living room as snow fell softly outside the windows. They had been working for hours, and the remains of a simple dinner shared at the coffee table lay forgotten as they discussed the guest list and program for the event. "I think we should invite the mayor and town council members," Ethan suggested, making a note on his laptop. "They've been supportive, and it would acknowledge the community's role in this project." Sophia nodded agreement, tucking her feet underneath her on the couch. "Absolutely. And what about your neighboring farmers, especially those who expressed interest in similar partnerships at the Harvest Festival?" "Good idea," Ethan replied. This could inspire others to explore innovative approaches to land use. As Sophia reached for her tablet to add these names to the list, her hand brushed against Ethan's. It was a brief contact, the kind that had happened countless times during their months of working together. But tonight, something was different. Neither pulled away immediately. Instead, their eyes met, and in that moment, The professional facade they'd maintained despite growing feelings seemed to waver. Sophia was the first to break the moment, withdrawing her hand and focusing intently on her tablet screen. "We should also consider transportation for guests coming from out of town," she said, her voice not quite steady. "Perhaps shuttle service from the local hotels." Ethan nodded, trying to regain his professional composure, despite the rapid beating of his heart. They worked for another hour, but an undercurrent of awareness ran beneath their practical discussion, making even the most mundane planning details feel charged with unspoken emotion. Finally, as midnight approached, Sophia set aside her tablet and stretched, fatigue evident in her movements. "I should head back to town," she said reluctantly. "It's getting late, and the roads might be treacherous with this snow." Ethan glanced out the window, where the gentle snowfall had intensified into genuine winter weather. "I'm not sure that's a good idea," he said with concern. The forecast mentioned possible whiteout conditions tonight. As if in confirmation, a gust of wind drove snow against the windows with sudden ferocity, the sound drawing both their attention. "You should stay here," Ethan continued. "The guest room is made up, and it's not worth risking the drive in these conditions." Sophia hesitated, clearly torn between practicality and awareness of how this changing routine might affect their carefully maintained boundaries. "If you're sure it's no trouble." "Of course not," Ethan assured her. "It's the sensible solution." The decision made, they fell into a surprisingly domestic routine, Ethan building up the fire while Sophia made tea in the kitchen, moving around each other's spaces with comfortable familiarity born of months of close collaboration. As they sat before the fire with their steaming mugs, the business documents set aside for the night, conversation flowed toward more personal topics. "What made you fall in love with equestrian sports?" Ethan asked, genuinely curious about the path that had led Sophia to her remarkable career. She smiled, her expression softening with memory. "My grandfather kept horses, nothing fancy, just sturdy quarter horses he used for work around his ranch. He put me on my first pony when I was 4 years old, and apparently, I refused to get off until they promised I could ride again the next day. So it was an immediate connection," Ethan observed. "Completely," Sophia agreed. "Something just clicked, this sense that I belonged on horseback. My parents weren't wealthy by any means, but they scraped together enough for lessons when they saw how passionate I was. My first trainer recognized something in me, a natural feel for the horse's movements, she called it, and helped me get opportunities I wouldn't probably have had otherwise." "And from there to the Olympics," Ethan said with quiet admiration. Sophia shook her head, her expression humbled despite her achievements. "It wasn't a straight line. There were years of setbacks, competitions where I placed last, horses that seemed promising but didn't work out. But I couldn't imagine doing anything else, so I persisted." She looked at him curiously. "What about you? Did you always know you'd take over the farm?" Ethan considered the question, one that touched on complex family dynamics and personal choices. "Not always," he admitted. "In high school, I dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. I was accepted to a good program, had the scholarship paperwork ready to sign. What changed?" "My father's health," Ethan replied, the old pain evident in his voice. "He had his first heart attack my senior year. It wasn't severe, but it was a warning sign. David was already established in his career in the city, and someone needed to help run the farm. So I deferred my acceptance, thinking it would be temporary. But it wasn't," Sophia said softly. "No. Dad had a second, more serious attack 2 years later. The farm needed full-time management, and by then, I'd realized how much I valued this life, the connection to the land, the rhythms of the seasons, even the challenges. So I gave up the veterinary dream and committed to farming. I don't regret it, even through the hardest times." "That speaks volumes about your character," Sophia said, her eyes reflecting the firelight as she regarded him with unmistakable admiration. They talked for hours, sharing stories and dreams, losses and triumphs, the professional walls between them dissolving in the intimate firelit setting. It was the most personal conversation they had ever had, revealing dimensions of each other's lives and characters that had only been hinted at during their months of partnership. As the fire burned down to embers and exhaustion finally began to claim them, Sophia stood to retire to the guest room. At the doorway, she paused, turning back to Ethan. "Thank you," she said. "For the guest room?" "It's nothing," he replied. "Not for that," Sophia clarified. "For trusting me with your family's legacy, for being willing to imagine a new future for this place, for believing in what we're building together." Before Ethan could respond, she stepped closer and gently kissed his cheek, the gesture brief but unmistakably meaningful. Then she turned and disappeared down the hallway, leaving Ethan standing in the doorway, his fingertips touching the spot where her lips had brushed his skin, a new certainty forming in his heart about what and who he wanted in his future. The snowstorm continued through the night and into the following day, effectively stranding them at the farmhouse. What might have been awkward instead felt natural, almost inevitable, as they shared breakfast and then decided to use the unexpected time together to visit the construction sites and check how the buildings were withstanding the winter weather. Bundled against the cold, they trudged through knee-deep snow to inspect the completed structures and those still under construction. The pristine white landscape transformed the property, highlighting the graceful lines of the new buildings against the